folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're back here for part two of the review of the defense against the Rams from Sunday. Just having the pleasure to watch between episodes the end of this incredible Titans-Dolphins game. Got me in a good mood, I'll tell you that, because the Ravens' paths to the playoffs have definitely opened up further in terms of the possibility of getting the number one seed with as few as 2 wins the rest of the way. Anyway, we'll have a discussion about that as we go through, or at the end at least. Just really nice to see Miami lose a football game anyway. They looked very mortal against Tennessee at home in this game. That's the first really bad team that they lost to. But anyway, we're here to talk about the Ravens defense a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the individual players in this game and some of their contributions and what went on. Obviously, some players having some tough games. We'll talk about that too. We won't be afraid to talk about all of the results, good and bad. And anyway, just in a real happy mood right now. Well, anyway, let's go ahead and jump right into it in terms of the individual player results in this game. And I'll go right from the top. We'll start talking about the defensive line. Travis Jones, a guy who has been improving throughout the whole season, I think. Definitely has made big contributions this year. He's done it primarily from that one tech spot, taking over snaps. When Pierce is out of there, they're almost never in the game together. Let me see if they played a single snap together in this particular game. I do not believe that they did. So effectively, he's acting as a backup nose tackle 100% of the time, and that is the case in this game. They were never on the field together. Something I'd still like to see between the two is moving him over to 3-tech. Unfortunately, if Matabike isn't here next year, it's probably something we might see, because I think they probably will try and re-sign Pierce and play him next to Jones for some snaps next year, because Jones looks like he has some ability to penetrate and whatnot. But he looked good in this game. Thought he played reasonably well against the run, but of providing some pass rush juice. Both of his pressures he had were late. In terms of one quarterback hit and 1 sack in this game. But nice to see him get back on the board of the sack. I think he had either half a sack or a full sack early in the season, but this was another nice contribution, another game of contributions from him. So positive player, bright future. One of the guys the Ravens have signed for 2024. So as with all of the young players, they really need them to keep coming through, because those are the guys they have for several years yet. So Travis Jones, we're looking forward to seeing more from him. Justin Matabike continues just an outstanding season. I have a recap of all his plays in the Star Treatment article, so I'll let you go there to kind of review that. Most of his contributions in this game were as a pass rusher. He didn't do too much as a run defender in this particular game. He had a one late sack. In fact, it was an ATS sack where he worked off a pressure from Oweh to clean up for that sack -8. Mentioned in the first show that gave him at least half a sack in 10 consecutive games, which ties him for the 6th longest streak in NFL history. Chris Jones is the only other guy who's an interior defensive lineman who's in that elite group of 11 guys who have a half sack in 10 or more consecutive games. So Justin Matabike certainly looks like he's going to get paid at the end of the season. He had a bunch of QHs in this game as well, 4 others. So 5 total QHs, since sacks, generally speaking, not at 100% of cases, are a subset of quarterback hits. You can get a sack where you dislodge the football and don't take the quarterback to the ground, in which case it's not a quarterback hit, but most of them are. For the most part, they are a subset. What else do I want to say? He lost another sack, another pressure to a penalty by that ticky-tack DPI that was on Humphrey. He had a nice pressure on that play, so that was lost. But it was a pressure at the time he got it. So in a lot of cases, calling that a pressure is a very reasonable thing. Several of the notes I have, and you'll notice this in the article, are plays where he was blocked effectively on a run play. One of the things I've been suggesting for a while is Matabike could probably be a more effective pass rusher if he were off the field on rundowns a little more, played a few less snaps. That would be another means by which either get Broderick Washington or Travis Jones in for some 3-tech snaps to replace him on early downs. And he's a very valuable player to have on the field. So you never really want to have him off until you realize that you might be losing something in terms of effectiveness on a per snap basis by having him on for all those plays. As a penetrator, he doesn't do as much for the Ravens' run defense, which is very much based on denying space at the line of scrimmage, which Pierce and Urban do very well. And creating opportunities for the linebackers to get in and make plays. Madubuike is more of a penetrator himself, a little bit undersized, and so he doesn't hold up as well to combination blocks at the line of scrimmage, where they start with a Cobb duo or 2-man block, and then one guy climbs off that. He's not your ideal player to hold up to those, and so I'd like to see the Ravens find a way to get him replaced for a few more early down snaps. And right now, Madubuike has played what percentage of snaps for the entire year? Because I know I've been bothered by it. But he has played 66.3% of snaps. It's almost 2/3, and that's really too much for a defensive lineman. The Ravens' top defensive linemen have usually been in the 50s on a year-in, year-out basis, particularly in more recent years. They've also had more specialists and whatnot, that you have more division between run and pass guys, more of a desire to get your kicked in outside linebackers on the field. But this team, because it's short on outside linebackers, needs to be particularly careful about how much they play their defensive linemen. And right now, if I just add up the percentage of snaps played by all the defensive linemen, I get 217.5%, which means the average defensive lineman has played about 43.5% of the snaps. And in my opinion, that is too much. It's only been 5 guys, by the way, that have taken any defensive snaps for this year. So, the contrarian would say, these guys are all still healthy. Why are you being such a hard ass about playing them less snaps? And my reasoning is that, there are players on this team. Madubuike, I think, is one of them. Pierce might be another, who could be more effective on a per snap basis if they were used a little bit less frequently. Pierce also 57.6% of the snaps by the year. Has been terrific, been absolutely outstanding. But maybe he'd be even better if he played a little bit less. So anyway, that's my beef with those guys, and it's also a reason why the Ravens carrying an extra roster spot like right now in the season, and I think that's going to go away with the activation of Pepe Williams this week, but they might want to consider adding another defensive lineman, while there are still a couple of guys out there who might actually be able to help them. Maybe guys who can play 20% of the snaps and take some of that load off the big two for this team. So anyway, just something to consider as we move down the stretch. So who else do we want to talk about? Let's talk about Brent Urban, who had a really terrific game in this year. Talked about a little bit on the first show, but the Ravens used that uncovered look where they use just one outside linebacker and have their 5-tech effectively holding down the edge on the other side. So normally in your base 3-4 defense, you have outside linebacker on either side, flanking 3 down linemen in your base package, and 2 linebackers behind them in a 4-man secondary. Well, this uncovered look is a way to get a 5-man secondary on the field. And instead of sacrificing the inside linebacker to do it, which would be what I would call jumbo nickel, they sacrifice a outside linebacker to do it, which makes it an uncovered nickel. The Ravens did that 17 times in this game. And I, as I mentioned in the packages show, it didn't really work out in terms of yards per play all that well. Small sample size, so we don't know everything just yet. But the Rams didn't try and run into the base at all. So if the Rams are going to pass into base, you have to present them with a look that will force them to make a choice that is more difficult for them. So by putting the extra defensive back on the field and the uncovered look, they got back to what has been more of the regular choice that they're providing opposing offensive coordinators for most of the year, and opposing quarterbacks for that matter, who may change the play at the line of scrimmage, is a willingness to basically signal that you can try the run against us, which the base package says, you're not going to run on me. The uncovered nickel is much more of a go ahead and try your luck with the run if you want to, because you have 5 defensive backs on the field. So I think that it's an intermediate package there, and with the Rams not running against the base, I think it was a good choice to bring out. I thought Urban himself played quite well in this game, which was nice to see. So Brent Urban, another good game. And as a friend of the show, we really appreciate him having a good game, being able to talk about that once in a while. Let's see, who else do we want to talk about? Michael Pierce had a fairly quiet game, personally. He's certainly not playing badly by any stretch, but he didn't make a pass rush contribution in this game to speak of. He was there for some of the run activity, and unfortunately, he's on the blocked notes for some of the run activity. Just not an ideal game for him in terms of standing out the way he has for most of the season. By the way, for the season this year, the Ravens have averaged giving up only 4.1 yards per play with Michael Pierce in the game, and 4.8 yards per play without Michael Pierce in the game. It is one of the very big differences on the entire team in terms of, when in, when not in, trying to see if there's even one other guy. Owe is 4.1 and 4.6, so he's been quite good too. Darby is 3.8 and 4.8 when you go down the list here, so that's a big one. Let's see if Hamilton, what's he doing? Here's a good one. Worley, 3.2 and 4.6. So not a whole ton of snaps played, but that's 109 plays to be in there for only 3.2 yards per play when he was in there. Trying to see what Hamilton was here. Yeah, Hamilton has been 4.3 yards in and 6.1 yards per play on a very small sample size of plays when he hasn't been in there. So anyway, that's a lot of those were in this game. In particular. So anyway, Pierce, one of the really good years in terms of that differential between when he's in and when he's not in. Broderick Washington saw some playing time in this game. Nothing particularly effective, frankly, for him. It's been a lot of people are really tagging Broderick with having a disappointing year. I certainly hope he can do more for the Ravens in 2024, because the Ravens have, looked at their 2024 roster, and I think they made an offer to both of Washington and Matabike, and they, obviously they wanted to get a bargain on either one after 3 seasons. Hope they could re-sign one, tack on 3 more years to the contract, and get a division of benefit, something that recognizes the fact that the player has less risk on the table if he is signed for 3 more years. And unfortunately, Matabike is not the one who bit. Washington did, and Matabike is having a all-pro year, and Washington is not having a great year at all. So anyway, that's been a little unfortunate, but hopefully Broderick will turn it around. He's going to be a much more important player to the Ravens, I think, next year. But I think still defensive line is one of the positions where the Ravens will be looking to use a draft pick in that 2024 draft. Let's move on and take a look at the inside linebacker group for a second. Patrick Queen, I thought, played a fine game. Generally avoided mistakes in this game for the most part. I think he did have 1 missed tackle, if I recall correctly. So he wasn't perfect or anything, but he's had bigger problems with missed tackles as the season has been going on. I'm trying to look for his missed tackle number here. Yeah, Patrick Queen had 1 missed tackle in this game. So also had 3 defensive wins among his tackles. So that was good. He still looks good knifing in. Honestly, he was blocked on a lot of the run plays early in this game. We know that one of Patrick's problems has been shedding blocks. While he's done better in coverage this year, he certainly hasn't been perfect. The missed tackles have kind of piled up in the last few weeks. If you look at PFF's missed tackles, and every system is a little bit different, but PFF, it really shows out in bold relief that he had only 3 missed tackles the first 6 weeks of the season. And then he's had 12 missed tackles in the last 7 games. So his missed tackles have gone through the roof. Now his missed tackle rate for the whole year is up to 13.3%, which is too high for a linebacker. That would be, not a good number for a linebacker. It would not be a good number for a safety either, and they have higher missed tackle rates. But if Queen is, going to be a good tackler at the NFL level, he's got to do better than that. I still believe it's a little bit below his career missed tackle rate. Yep, his career missed tackle rate is 15.8%. So this is actually his best season as a tackler, despite it still not being outstanding. So the Ravens will have a tough decision to make at the end of this year. Queen does a lot of nice things for them. I don't think he's going to be signable. In particular, the tweet we saw recently where he didn't think 4 years at $67 million was a reasonable number. I don't see how the Ravens would see fit to pay that kind of money. I don't think they would do it even if he was their one guy they were signing, but having Roquan signed, it really does make sense. I know we've talked about this before on the show, but I'll lay it out there. When you have a weak side linebacker role, you can split up and platoon to go next to your one guy at the mic, who is obviously Roquan. You have an opportunity to save a lot of money. You can save money in cap. You can also create two or three specialists. You have a dime back. You maybe have a passing down back. The Ravens used to have two guys they played on early downs. They had, at one point, it was Jameel McLean who would play a lot of first downs, and Dannell Ellerbe would come in and play second and medium or long, and then they'd bring in a dime back on third down. Some of that same stuff happened when they had Patrick Owasso to go with Kenny Young and Anthony Levine, say, in 2018. So they've had guys who have each had subspecialties within that weak side linebacker role. Trenton Simpson, we don't know what kind of player he's going to be next year. Maybe he's a pass coverage guy because of his safety background, and maybe he's a guy who comes in and is a hard-hitting tackler and pass rusher more in the run and chase mold of Patrick Queen that we're going to enjoy seeing him develop that way. But whatever he is, he's probably going to have some weaknesses at inside linebacker just because he's young and new to the NFL. And I don't think we've seen enough out of him in the preseason or in the very limited number of snaps he's played during the regular season to say, yeah, this guy's going to be great. I think that, what they loved about him was what he did in college, and he stands a chance to be great. But to put him in the position to do that, I hope they'll do it by splitting up his snaps and at least initially having him play the snaps where he can be the most effective, and then gradually grow into a larger role as he earns it in terms of learning what's happening behind him in coverage. Maybe as a safety, he's got that as a portable skill set. If he does, boy, would that be fantastic to have that out of a young linebacker. I think one of the things we really saw was that he could rush the passer very effectively, and hopefully that's something they can bring him in to do pretty quickly. One of the things I don't think we'll see, and I know this has been talked about with Trenton Simpson, is him going to the edge and being a guy who would be in there on third down. I think he's an extra off-ball pass blocking asset. You can move him up into the A gap and use simulated pressure and have him or Roquan rush from that look, as they have done with Queen this year. So I think you have options on how you can line him up, but I don't really see him being a true edge rusher. Again, an inside linebacker always can line up on the edge of the line of scrimmage as kind of a second edge and get a run at the quarterback that way. No problem with that kind of look, but I think that Trenton Simpson will never be quite big enough to be your prototype edge rusher who has to beat a tackle on the outside. So anyway, I expect we'll see him in a more traditional off-ball role. Roquan Smith, enormous game this week. So many things he did well. He did some things wrong as well, and he was getting blocked a lot early in the game in the run. So I don't want to pretend like it was all good, but I think I've got a very fair set of up and down notes for him. I know when Maureen and I were taking the notes, and then when we're resetting them into the framework of the article in the star treatment section, he had a lot, and he made plays in the passing game. He got good pressure. He made some plays in the run game. Had some valuable stops on defense. And made a couple nice downhill tackles on pass plays. So he had a smattering of things that he did well. Didn't have a great coverage game, but he did some other things well in this game. And Roquan's been a terrific defender for the entire year. And if you look at just the player he's become here in Baltimore, I did not expect it at the time of that trade, is all I can say. So he's a much greater player coming into the structure and coaching of the Baltimore system and bringing his own brand of leadership and follow me that he just naturally has. There's some people that they walk into the room, they're automatically the leader, and he's one of them. And it's really good to see that. All right, let's move on here and talk about the outside linebackers in this game. Not a great game from the outside linebackers. Jadeveon Clowney, not much in the way of pressure in this game. He did get a nice bubble on a run right that ended up being tracked down, which was good play. Did not do much in pressure. He's been very consistent with pressure. Again, the footing on this field, not conducive to pressure. It was conducive to motor. Obviously, the Stafford was in the pocket for quite a long time. Stafford normally gets rid of the ball pretty quickly, but he's up at 2.85 seconds in this game, which is a fairly high time to throw for him. So that's indicative of taking longer with the football. And because he's not particularly mobile, he doesn't have the luxury that Lamar has to hold onto the football for 5, 6, 7 seconds on some plays before he gets rid of it. Stafford has that internal clock that really makes him throw the ball away and truncates some of those outliers. So he'll never end up with a 3.5 seconds to throw for an entire 35 or 40 pass effort for a game. It's almost impossible given, how his internal clock, is forcing him to throw the football. So anyway, this was a game where a lot of the cleanup that the Ravens have done didn't show up quite as well. They did get 2 cleanup sacks on ample time and space, but a lot of that compound pressure didn't really work. And what's more, a lot of the deception they normally use to get compound pressure, if you want to go back and listen to that first effort, I talked about it in the pass rush group, really was ineffective. Both their stunts were ineffective, their blitzes were ineffective, their off-ball blitzes, and they were ineffective in terms of when they compounded groups with simulated pressure as well. They did have a few simulated pressure looks which worked, but generally whenever they tried multiple elements of deception on the same play, it generally did not work. And the Rams are up around 10 yards per play on all 3 of those elements, whether it was any kind of compound pressure, stunts, or off-ball blitzes. So definitely something where Stafford pretty much decoded what the Ravens were doing, and Clowney was one of the players who didn't really contribute much pressure-wise. Talked about it a little bit on the first show, but the Ravens really missed Harrison in this game. He's a guy who eats some early down snaps in base defense, and they played a little bit of base in this game, about 8 snaps. Basically, when they played that base, Stafford decided he was going to pass the football, and Van Noy was on for a lot of that base with Robinson. What they really like to do is have Harrison and Robinson on the field, which eats some early down snaps. And in a longer game like this, and they had 72 offensive snaps in this game, that really puts your pass rushers, gives them a better chance to stay fresh later in the game. They have to play shorter stretches of consecutive plays, and they're often breaking up a series of plays with a rest down where they get to go to the sideline for one play, often 2, where the other team might run the ball on first down. The Ravens take advantage of having good run defenders like Harrison and Robinson on the field, who, in truth, they may not be any better than certainly Oweh or Clowney in terms of the run defense, or Van Noy even, but they're guys who are giving those guys rest, and they're eating some of the snap count on those plays. And I think particularly against a team like the Rams that likes to run the football, you need a good discipline on the edge to go with good play up the middle. And I think that the Ravens fell short in a few different ways in this game. They weren't perfect on the edge. They had a lot of problems with good schemed interior blocking in this game, getting Kyron Williams free for extra yardage. Some of that was on the inside linebackers. Obviously, some was on the outside linebackers, letting plays get to the edge. And the variety of things the Rams did just ended up being fairly effective running the football at 4.3 yards per carry. It was a day where passing was more effective, but the running, it was still pretty effective. And Kyron Williams, they didn't have an obvious answer for him in this football game. Let's see. Let's talk about Odafe Oweh a little bit. He had a late pressure that led to the sack. I believe it was by Jones. Let me just confirm that he's the one who got that. Let's find that sack. No, it wasn't the sack by Jones. It was the sack by Matabike. No, it wasn't that either. It had to be a quarterback hit then I'm thinking of here that this happened on. And what do you know? I can't find it right now, so I'm going to look stupid, and that's the way it's going to work. But anyway, Owe had a pressure contribution or two that he made in this game, but it wasn't his best game either. The Ravens need more out of Odafe Owe. They need to get a lot of pressures down the stretch against some good quarterbacks, and they need to get fast pressures. As I said in the first episode, I'm going to repeat this one time in this episode too. This was a game where conditions were ideal for passing the football. Why was that true? It was true because when the field is slick, those pass rushers have a harder time getting off, and they're the ones who have to beat an offensive lineman. So it's easier for them if they can make that very hard first step, those very hard cut steps in order to get to the quarterback. On the other hand, receivers had a field day because of the wet conditions. First of all, pressure was taking longer to get home. So that means more often are the receivers able to get to the top of the stem and make their move on a defensive back. Well, the moves in this game, because that offensive player knows where he's going and the defensive player doesn't, often result in the defensive player overcommitting to the wiggle that he's thrown by that receiver. And that led to some great double moves in this game. There are probably other great routes run as well. I haven't studied that as closely, but there were some fantastic double moves in this game to get free. The Rams also had some coverage breakdown, for example, on the left side of the field 3 times, likely once open and twice to Beckham, where they had long balls down that side of the field. But they also had some double moves that contributed to that, and real nice to see that work out for the offense. But on defense, they had to try and stop it. So the point I want to make out of this is I would not project forward that the Ravens defense is somehow now cooked against good passing quarterbacks, which they will face for the remainder of the season, with the exception of the Pittsburgh game. I think you look at this as an isolated incident. They gave up 6.6 yards per pass play. By the way, giving up 6.6 yards per pass play like that's a disaster. There's 10 teams in the National Football League who would love to give up 6.6 yards per pass play, but the Ravens don't happen to be one of them, since they're giving up this historic 4.2 yards per pass play coming in. So obviously they're unhappy with that situation, but I also don't think it really projects out to be a problem for the Ravens as the season continues. And I think they'll get back to better results under more normal weather conditions that are more levelized in terms of favoring the offense and the defense going forward. Don't really have much to say about Tavius Robinson. Again, he was in there primarily to face the run. Only played 16 snaps the whole game. I will say this about Robinson's rookie year in general, though, that he's put himself in a good position. Has he been outstanding in any one area? No. Has he been okay in several areas? Yeah, I think he has. And I think, the normal growth we see out of players is very good. And it's really nice to see a guy get 30% of the snaps in his rookie year. And he's right around that. And that amount of live fire will really benefit him going forward. He did get a lot of it very early on when the Ravens had a lot of outside linebackers missing before they picked up Van Noy to take a heavy snap share load. But Robinson is a guy that I think is going to benefit from having that playing time in year one. And I'd look forward to him to be one of the players to move to another level, not necessarily into a real star level next year, but move into a level where he's contributing even more. Maybe he'll be a player who can kick in and rush the passer on some passing downs as part of multiple OLB packages, and we'll see a little bit more from him as a pass rusher in 2024. Kyle Van Noy had a big game individually, so I did want to talk about him a little bit. Now, he had 3 plays. He had a nice pressure, a pass defensed on a ball that went incomplete to Nakua. I talked about that a little bit earlier in terms of what exactly happened. And the announcers were on Nakua for dropping the ball and looking upfield and yada, yada. But Van Noy actually changed the rotation on that ball with the tip on it, which is what led to the incomplete pass. So that was nice. Big play. Huge play with the 8-yard drop on the swing pass to the right. That was just a great Van Noy anticipating the pass going out there and being in position to take down the back there. And I'm trying to think of when that was. It was towards the end of. It was late in the third quarter. And the Ravens got the ball back at that point. Obviously, that ended that drive. So he had, I think, 2 drive-ending plays that he contributed to during the game. So nice day for Van Noy in terms of his contributions. In the secondary, we'll talk through some of these guys fairly quickly. We did not see Ronald Darby on the field. Now, that's a little bit of a surprise. Thought maybe they'd play him a little bit with Humphrey, but for whatever reason, they saw fit to sit him down, play Humphrey every snap, and Humphrey's ready to go. He's certainly had a lot of time off this year. You want to get him out of there as much.
Aaron Rodgers' season is officially over, but yours has just begun at MyBookie. NFL, college ball, and a brand new cash-out system gives you options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay hit, cash out early and place another bet, or let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join us at MyBookie for an entire season filled with daily odd boost, same-game parlays, and huge prize pool contests. Right now, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code RAVENS on your first deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 in cash instantly credited to your MyBookie account. That's promo code RAVENS to claim your cash bonus now. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie.
Much as you can. The Ravens were better with Humphrey on the field than they were with him off the field. But still, that's a little bit unusual. I'm sorry, that is not actually true. The Ravens, because Humphrey played every snap, the Ravens were equivalent with Humphrey on the field as they were with him not on the field. So anyway, he is a player the Ravens are going to want to have on the field, obviously, but they've got to figure out if they want to do some rotation in the defensive backfield to get Darby on the field a little bit. He's been good. I guess he probably can stay sharp enough from just his practice, maybe a little bit of play at the end of games, but there'd be, I think, a pretty damn good chance that they might have to turn to him at some point the rest of the season. And we do have a mailbag question about that I'll wait a couple of minutes to answer here. Kyle Hamilton, big game. Mentioned the first show, 4.1 yards per play with Kyle Hamilton in the game, 7.7 yards per play without Kyle Hamilton in the game. That's an enormous difference. And obviously one where probably accentuated a little bit by some misfortune or some good luck in terms of when Hamilton was in there. But Hamilton was exceptional. And Mollett did not have a great game and that's basically the 2 players who were exchanging time in this game. If you add up their 2 snaps, they get 69 of 72 snaps that they were on the field. So there were 3 other snaps where Mollett was off and they were in a base package after Hamilton was injured. So really tough to see him on the field. Good news today that he's likely to be back at some point this season. Harbaugh says day to day. The joke is, of course, that means 4 weeks. Hopefully, he'll be back in time for that Miami game, which, despite the fact that Miami has lost tonight, the Ravens are still going to need to win that game. So they if they want to be sure they win the home field for a lot of reasons, for one of them being that that's one of their better chances to win a game because it's at home. They really are going to need to win that game to have a high probability of getting that number 1 seed. I guess it's time to say right now that I don't see any point in being scared of the number 1 seed. The Ravens have been the number 1 seed exactly one time in 2019. It did not work out for them. We all know what happened. It's the first or second most disappointing loss in Ravens history following the 2006 game where they had a bye, but not the number 1 seed, and they faced the Colts at home in that second round. Obviously, if they'd had the number 1 seed, they wouldn't have faced the Colts. They would have faced the Jets instead, and that would have been a nice, a better matchup. But they ended up facing the Colts, and that was a very frustrating day, filled with profanity, much like the Titans game was. But I don't think either is really a reason to be afraid of that number 1 seed. The reason to want the number 1 seed is to look at what Kansas City has done with it. Pat Mahomes has never played a road playoff game. I am particularly tired of the AFC's number 1 seed, SEED, being ceded to them, CEDED, year after year. We need to find a way to pry that game out of Arrowhead So there's at least a reasonable chance of winning it and have somebody other than the Chiefs, playing there. So, the Ravens are as deserving as any team. As fans, as season ticket holders, we deserve to have an AFC championship game at home. We last had one in 1970. I mean, that's 53 years ago now. That's too long to wait for a conference championship game. So it's time. And this is a year where, one of the things you have a week off. Should you be feared about that? Well, maybe you should think about what that means and try and practice for it and try and shake off the rust and try and be more careful about it. But look also around the AFC right now at all the injuries and how they've impacted every single race. And tell me, you wouldn't like to have 1 or even 2 weeks off between, week 18, hopefully playing for nothing, and week 19 in that, while everybody else is playing in the wild card week, taking a week off and getting prepared for a home playoff game in the divisional round and being the only team that has that privilege, and how that increased health can improve your chances to win. Ravens entered this game against the Rams, the much healthier team, and it was one of the things that helped them get through it, despite that injury to Hamilton, was that they were largely healthy across the board. One of the key players, Justin Madubuike. I don't know if he'd have played. If the Ravens had not had this bye week in there, I'm not sure he'd have played. He had 5 quarterback hits and a sack. Was that significant? Yeah, it's pretty damn significant this time to have time of year to have a week off for all those little minor injuries that will add up. If you want to throw in who might be the real beneficiary of extra rest right now, it might be Kyle Hamilton. We don't know how quickly he's going to be back, but it could very well be that his first game back is a playoff game. And if that's the case, having that extra week off would be a big deal for him. So anyway, so many ways that can help you. I think it's myopic to look at the way things have worked out in the past and say that 1 of 1 times it did not work out, or that even 2 out of 2 times, if you want to toss in the 2006 game, it didn't work out. Of course, if you want to toss in the 2006 game, you also got to toss in the fact that they beat the Texans in the 2011 game with a bye, and then went on and almost went to the Super Bowl against the Patriots with a favorable matchup in that divisional round, and then rolling into losing an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl only on the Evans and Cundiff plays. So you take your chances when you can get them. I think the number 1 seed is something the Ravens, obviously should want to get, no matter what some people will tell you about that. Arthur Mollett, tough game in this one. He was out there. The Rams averaged 9 yards per pass play when Mollett was on the field. 21 pass plays, 189 yards, so 9.0. So that did not work out very well for the Ravens, and they have to think about now, what are they going to do at that slot corner position going forward. Mollett has given them some solid play. I would say some up and down play, certainly some good pass rushing. That's had real impact for the team. He's done some good things as a downhill player, been a pretty good run defender, but he hasn't been the greatest coverage guy, and that's something the Ravens are going to have to decide what they want to do in terms of multiple things. So Pepe Williams is one of the options. Another one we'll talk about later during the mailbag. I want to wait on that. All right. Brandon Stevens gave up another touchdown in this game. That's unfortunate. He continues to be the Ravens' best corner and in there on every play. It looked like he was playing some left corner and some right corner in this game. So I'm not sure exactly what they were trying to accomplish, whether they're matching him up on a particular receiver or what the deal was. They might have been traveling in this game. One guy who did not have a particularly good game was Geno Stone. Now, Stone has been a little bit of a feast or famine player on the season. Obviously, we all know he's got 6 picks, but he's also had a season of some not great tackling. He did make a couple decent plays in this game, so I don't want to say like he didn't have any tackles at all or any good plays. He certainly had a couple of nice downhill plays, but again, he missed some tackles in this one. 3 more according to PFF to go with 7 tackles made on the season. He's missed just under 20% of his tackles, which is far too high. and it's certainly not an acceptable number. And it's part of the definition at safety. I think it's one of the things that other teams will look for in trying to ascribe value to Geno Stone is he really going to hurt us as a tackler? We know he's a great back end coverage safety. He's been fantastic this year, and he can do a lot for us in terms of finding the football, being the back end of a zone defense. He's proved extremely adept at that. But he's going to have to improve his tackling. And it had started off the year exceptionally strong, and it's been quite weak. I had made the comment that in the month of October, he probably cost himself the defensive player of the month, despite having 4 interceptions, because he also had, I think, 7 missed tackles that month. So that's going to be something that's going to hurt you relative to other linebackers. I forget who won it. It might have been Quincy Williams of the Jets or somebody. It was some off-ball linebacker who won the award, who had 2 interceptions, but he had a pretty good tackling month as well. So it would not surprise me if that's what the voters didn't like about Geno in terms of that. So anyway, Geno certainly has provided the Ravens a lot here. We certainly hope that either he can go make a lot of money, or maybe the Ravens could sign him back at a reasonable price. And I think that's something that the price may have moderated. The price of Madubuike is certainly going way up, but the price of Geno Stone may be coming down at this point. Geno does provide McDonald the way to operate his defense the way he has this year. So if you have Marcus Williams and Geno Smith on the back end, you can have Kyle Hamilton move him up to slot corner and otherwise play voracious underneath defense, and also rotate coverages a lot of different ways, because both Hamilton and Stone are able, both Williams and Stone are able to do that, and allow you to do different things with your other defensive backs on plays and confuse quarterbacks that way. They've been very effective at that, and the cost of doing so, the price of playing poker there, has been pretty low in terms of the additional yards per carry on runs that they've given up to do it. So I think it's one of the things why McDonald is labeled a genius, is that he's made such a good trade-off in that regard. And it's not terribly unreasonable that the Ravens could try and get Geno back. I think particularly if Madubuike and Queen both end up walking. I think Queen will. I think it's likely Madubuike will it well, because I think he might have priced himself out of town. But in the case of Stone, maybe there's a price. Maybe there's a reasonable value they can get him back for. I think that'll give him the freedom to move Kyle Hamilton and could keep him at slot corner instead of him moving him back to the back end. So that's something that you get as a benefit from that. Marcus Williams looked a little tentative on one tackle in particular, where he was kind of hurting again. And we've seen him do a better job of wrapping up. I think the last game against the Chargers, and maybe even the previous game before that as well. That's something obviously for him to be on the field that's got to be present. He looked pretty good, I thought, in coverage this game, and in particular the play on the sideline where he got up high to deflect the ball. It was going to be incomplete and out of bounds, but that Atwell was over there, and he actually knocked Atwell out of the game with a concussion with the hit on that play. So you want to out physical the other team. You want to generally, the more physical team takes fewer injuries. And so that's something you got to look for. And Marcus Williams, when he did that, definitely a positive thing. Worley, a guy, played one snap in this game. I just want to point out that he's a guy who may or may not be back next year. But what I would expect him to do with Worley is bring him to camp and probably give him a small amount of guaranteed money in a vet min contract. Then he provides fungibility of the roster in terms of having a guy you can make a handshake deal with that will be cut for sure on cut down day, be back for that opener or in the first couple of weeks, and also provides you some ability to have a low cost cut on your team if there's another guy you want to keep. If there's another safety they have, maybe an undrafted guy, maybe another guy they do draft this year that they have the choice of dropping to the practice squad or keeping on the 53. And it might not even be a safety. It might be at another position entirely, but a guy who could make a contribution like Worley did on special teams. But the Ravens next year, I would project they will have much more use for the safeties that they have, between the combination of wanting Hamilton to stay up at slot corner and wanting to have a guy who can play dime on that weak side. So you really are, there's going to be times when you need to have 4 safeties in the game at the same time if they go to exactly what I'm suggesting here. And in order to do that, you probably need to have 5 active on game day. So your safeties end up making up a larger portion of your special teams. And if that's the case, then I think Worley's job is fairly secure. He's looked very good this year in terms of how he's played. And I think the Ravens will have other options, whether it's UDFAs, draft picks, other guys that are forgotten fringe roster guys on other teams that are thought to be of low value. Ozzie Newsome in his tenure and DaCosta as well have been the masters of finding such players and really finding value there. So I think they'll find the guys they want to fill 5 safety roster spots, even if Geno Stone leaves. All right, well, that's enough for the individual players. Let's go to some of the mailbag questions we have here, because we have quite a little bit in the mailbag and some good stuff here. So let's make sure we do as much of this as we can. Here's the first, and this is from Imaginary Internet Guy, who is at Diet Woke Lime. He says, should the Ravens find more snaps for Ronald Darby to keep other corners like Humphrey better rested? My handle, okay, yeah. So basically he's saying, should they rotate? They've had success doing that in the past with Humphrey, including earlier this season. Obviously, the Ravens coaches feel like Humphrey is the guy they want in there for every down. And I think one of the questions that has come from somebody else is there another alternative to keep Humphrey in there every down? And that's Daniel Sampaio, who says he's at Dan XCell. He says, Ken, assuming Kyle is out, how would you feel about Marlon going back to slot corner? He's shown success there in the past, and outside corner seems like a deep position for the Ravens, even without him. Would he be a better option? So I think there's a lot of value in that, Daniel. I think that if you move Humphrey into the slot, one thing you do is you magnify his physicality, the impact of that on the game. So, there are times where I want him on the outside because his baseball bat-like arms could be used more effectively there. But you also, in terms of his downhill play, monitoring the line of scrimmage in the way that Hamilton has, and even rushing the quarterback is on the table for Humphrey in that case. And Humphrey, I think he had a time or two where he rushed the quarterback in this particular game. Let me just check the blitzes again. One more time. Yeah, they blitzed Stevens and Humphrey on one play where Humphrey actually had a quarterback hit in this game. So it's not like they don't like to have him get after the quarterback, but you can't do it much when they're on the outside. You got a limited set of looks where generally speaking, the wide receivers are tighter to the formation where you can actually blitz Humphrey off the edge in that kind of place with a cat blitz, a corner blitz, as they call it. I think that there would be value to bringing Humphrey into the slot. And I think he could be a pass rush presence, a run presence. I do question the logic in it on this level, at least, is that I think you don't have a naturally what's the word I'm looking for? Sudden athlete who matches well from up with slot receivers who have a lot of jukey goodness to them, and that's a lot of slot receivers who aren't necessarily the quickest players on the field, but they're very sudden athletes, and they're difficult to cover. The good thing about Humphrey is he's going to generally be very good at using zone principles. And if he can work with the linebacker that's next to him, it's going to be an inside linebacker to close those windows. Then he has a chance to be very helpful in that regard, very useful in that regard. So I could see it. I could see Humphrey moving back to the slot. When he's played there, he's been one of the best slot corners in the league. I just think he also gives you a lot of value on the outside as a boundary corner. Maybe that flexibility is exactly the thing you love, and the Ravens needs that slot corner right now. They used arguably their best or second best defensive player to move Kyle Hamilton there. So is it reasonable they might move Humphrey there too within this construct of this defense and use Darby on the outside, who has certifiably worked with the way McDonald has run the defense? I don't think it's an unreasonable solution. I just don't know if it's exactly the solution they'll go for, but reasonable question for sure. Let's see. We Got Ange Love 85, and that's Nikki 623 or 622A. Sorry about that. Ken, how will the defense change with Kyle missing some time? Also, with the way we started yesterday and the 2019 playoff game, will the number 2 seed be better, especially if Week 18 is meaningless? All right, let me answer that one first. I think if 1 week off is good, 2 weeks off is still marginally better, at least. Are there risks? Sure. Would you still rather play that way? I think the answer is yes. This town is snake bit with buys burning them. With the Ravens and in the past and the Orioles this year, I think we've built up a resistance to it that is probably not grounded in fact, and is in fact grounded in a very small sample size. I think that just logically, you'd rather have the time off, and it's on the coaches to keep the players ready for these games and do things maybe a little bit differently than they did it in 2019. Same guys are here. They know what went wrong in 2019, or they can figure it out in some sense. And if you need to do some things to stay sharp, well, go ahead and do those. But I don't think you have to play an actual game of football to force that upon your players. I think you can probably replicate some of that in practice and maybe be a little bit more physical than you otherwise would, and try and work on some of the drills that really emphasize timing and whatnot, which could be a little bit rustified if you take 2 weeks off. So anyway, I'm all in favor of getting every bye they can, and I'm also in favor of playing a meaningless Week 18 game against the Steelers. And I think that could have two benefits. Number one is you might actually want to let the Steelers in the playoffs over other teams like, say, Buffalo. I want nothing to do with Buffalo. I'd love to see the Steelers again in the playoffs. And if losing a meaningless game to the Steelers gets the Steelers in as the 7 seed and the Ravens are in as the 1 seed, then I am all for that, even though it means you might, be careful about what you ask for. You might get the Steelers if they manage to upset the Chiefs or the Dolphins or whoever the team is in that wild card round. But I think you take your chances and get the worst set of teams in the playoffs if you can. I think the Ravens would be well served, frankly, for the Steelers to be in the playoffs as opposed to a team like the Chiefs. Anyway, the other question you asked is how will the defense change with Kyle missing? I think they will still try and stay with the same too high look, Ange. I think that what they're basically trying to do in the trade-off between run and pass defense that we've talked so much about, that will stay. But I think that the player will change, and I something tells me they're not just going to be thoroughly happy with Arthur Mollett being the only choice there. So I think Humphrey is on the table. I think Pepe is on the table in terms of being there, and I think that the Ravens are going to look at all the options at this point. Based on what happened against the Rams and the quarterbacks they have yet to face the rest of the year. But great question. Really appreciate it. I think we have one more and another one that's very similar. Randy Morgan also, thank you. Do you think they should consider moving Marlon to the slot if Hamilton is out for an extended period? The point he makes additionally is that Marlon hasn't looked great on the outside recently. I think Marlon has looked pretty good on the outside. You could maybe say he's looked a little rusty, but he's given up very little in terms of yards per target on the year still. And I think you take your chances with Marlon on the outside or at slot. I think he will play a very high percentage of the snaps. I don't think they've from their indication of this game is they're not going to coddle Marlon Humphrey. So whether they play him in at slot corner or on the outside, I expect him to be in pretty much every snap the rest of the way. And that may still mean that there's a chance for Darby to be in on the outside. So anyway, really great set of questions. Appreciate that always. And as always, you can use hashtag Filmstudy Mailbag to drop a question in about the offense or the defense. Be happy to hear them on both. And I want to make that a larger component of the show. Was considering having people on to ask their question directly. If you'd be in favor of that, and you're a person who asks questions regularly, hit me up with a DM. Or even if you're not a person who asks questions regularly, and you'd like to do that, we could probably arrange for that to happen and add you into our cast to discuss your question. It can be like a mini version of a short, is your question and why you think something ought to be a certain way. And by the way, hashtag Film Study Mailbag is also for comments. So if you say, I saw A and B and C, and I think this means D and E, I want to hear that too. You don't have to ask in a question form. If you just got an interesting point to make about the game of football, please drop it in hashtag Film Study Mailbag, and I'll respond and get to it on a show. All right, outstanding. Now we have one thing to do left for the remainder of the show, and that's talk about the MVPs from this game. So I'll go back and do that. My number 3 guy, Kyle Van Noy, outstanding game. It was actually a fairly tight set of plays that he was involved in, but the tackle of Williams for an 8-yard loss forced a punt, and that was just one of 2 drive-ending plays that he was part of. He had a fast pressure on the 3rd and 9 in overtime. So if you think about it, that 3rd and 9 in overtime, getting pressure on that, forcing the punt that was returned by Wallace for the game-winning score is one of the game's most important plays, and really nice that he had that. So he gets my number 3 MVP in this game. My number 2 is Roquan Smith. Roquan had what I would call a fairly up and down game. He's certainly in the notes a lot, and I'll let you go out and look at the article, but he's in there a lot for being blocked on successful run plays for 6+ yards. So we always note those and how the blocks worked out anytime it's at least 6 yards, if you're wondering what our formula is for doing it. Honestly, the Rams just did a very good job of getting a helmet on him play after play. They did pretty much the same to Queen. And those guys both had a tough time getting off their blocks in level 2 when they started in as level 1 duos and climbed into combination blocks for whoever is doing that. So he did some other things. He got pressure in the game that did some things. He had some nice follow-up. Owe had a missed tackle in the backfield that he took down for a run for -3. Owe might have had him for -4, -5 on the play, but it's one of those plays where Owe's missed tackle actually improved the chance for Smith to make the tackle. So while it's technically goes in the book as a missed tackle, it's not a bad missed tackle at all. He played a good game, generally speaking, although it was not without its warts. Anyway, he gets my 2nd star. It's a defense that, there are a lot of players who did some good things, and there's very few players who did it without warts in this game. I give you my 3 honorable mentions aside from those 2 I just mentioned before I give you number 1. Kyle Hamilton gets an honorable mention. They're just so much more effective with him in the game than without him. I've talked about that already, so I don't need to more. Travis Jones, certainly an ascending player. Did some good things as a pass rusher in this game. A fairly limited set of total snaps, but he's one of the players that I really expect to contribute to a deep playoff run this year if they make one. And the other guy is Brent Urban, who came into an expanded role in this game because of the need for the Ravens to play this uncovered end look that allowed them to keep 5 defensive backs on the field, and had a pressure in the game, but also did some good things in terms of dying space, which is really his calling card in the NFL. So we'll see. But it looks like, right to me, Brent Urban's having a pretty damn good year. And I think he's likely to be back with the Ravens next year. Again, roster fungibility is always part of it with him. It's always something he brings to the table. But in addition, he's just playing good defense at this point, and the Ravens can't afford to be super picky about defensive linemen. They need to bring a good cadre to camp. It's a position where you often have injuries, and incredibly, knock on wood, the Ravens have gone 15 weeks without having any serious injuries on the defensive line, which has been absolutely remarkable. But certainly in recent years, that's not been the case. They've suffered through some injuries. And moving on, my number 1 guy, who's Justin Madubuike. Honestly, pretty easy pick this week. 5 quarterback hits in a single game. 1 sack extends the streak to 10 games. And as we talked about, that's a historic streak. If you missed some of the things from earlier, go out and look at my tweets, and it has a list of the other players in there are a total of 11 that have had at least half a sack in 10 consecutive games. Madubuike, by the way, been very efficient in that way in terms of the fewest possible sacks, but in 10 games, he's had 10 sacks. So he's had one game with 2 sacks, two games with a half a sack, and the other 7 games he's had 1 sack exactly. So he's in rarefied air right now, and the NFL record stands at only 12. There's been only 1 guy who ever did that. Maybe it's 2. I think it's 1 guy who's ever done that, and 4 guys who did 11, and then 6 guys who did 10. So he's about to move into the very upper crust if he can do another game, and if he does 2 more games, he'll have a share of that record. Well, thanks again for joining me. I enjoy doing this show, even solo here. Always like to have somebody to talk football with, but go through some of your questions in the mailbag. Felt like that a little bit tonight, and some of my memories from the old bygone days of the Baltimore Colts from that first episode. I ask you to go back and take a listen for that if you want to hear about the pass rush, what the Ravens did differently in terms of packages, a lot of my individual scheme thoughts, and some of the way the game played out in terms of the weather and whatnot are in that first episode, and I hope you'll find that worth a listen. If you're interested in doing a film study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter, and I'll get back to you very quickly to talk about when we can record a show and what part of an idea that you might have would be interesting to talk about, I think, and non-duplicative of things we've done recently. There's always a lot of overlap, by the way, in any kind of podcasting about football because the game is only so complicated. We can talk about different things only so long. I am very blessed that as I see these come across on Twitter, I like to talk to a lot of the analysts coming up with really new ideas on this show. But I also want to talk to Ravens fans who are passionate about our team because that's where a lot of people really want the content. They don't want to hear about, this new way of judging pass rushers relative to expected pass rush effectiveness on particular plays if it doesn't involve the Ravens directly. And that's where you come in. Hit me up with your ideas and I'll get back to you and we'll talk about that. So until next time, we'll see you later and talk to you next time on Film Study.